All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. So thanks for joining us this morning. This is a small tool to help your threat modeling. My name is Darren Boyd. I'm a Principal Security Solutions Architect with AWS. And with me today is Jessie Wei. She's a Senior Solutions Engineer. Both of us come from Australia, where the coffee is better. But thank you for having us. All right, let's get started and have a look at our short and sharp agenda. First, we'll just do a quick level set on why should you even do threat modeling. And then we're going to move into the meat of this, which is a tool to help you get higher value in less time. And we're going to introduce the tool, and Jessie's going to take us through a demo. Right, so why should you threat model? Well, first of all, threat modeling helps you identify security issues and come up with a strategy to address them in the context of your system. Secondly, it directly allows you to understand what security requirements are needed versus what is not in order to deliver a secure product or service. Now, because threat modeling can be done in the earlier stages of design, it means that you get early insights. And these early insights allow you to build securely with the least amount of work associated with rework. So, how do you threat model? Well, there's many ways to threat model, and just like programming languages, there's pros and cons to each of them. But one place we like to start is the ShotStack 4-question frame for threat modeling, which poses 4 simple, open-ended questions to help you structure your thinking. The first question is, what are we working on? The intent of this question is to help you and your team agree upon what you're working on and the details that are relevant to security. The most common way of answering this question is by providing and creating a diagram, most often a data flow diagram. Next is, what can go wrong? This is about thinking contextually about what can go wrong with your system and coming up with threat statements. Then you move into what are we going to do about it? This is about looking at those threat statements and understanding which risk response strategies could you use to address them. And this would typically include coming up with mitigations. The most common, when you're using AWS, it's very common for you to consider how you could use the shared responsibility model to your advantage, use our services and features, but also look for mitigations in your own code. What we do find is builders such as software developers are very good at this phase. When presented with a problem, builders are really good at coming up with a solution. And the final one is, did we do a good enough job? This is about inspecting the outputs from the previous sections and deciding whether or not we did a good enough job and if we could get better over time. Now, like I said, builders are really good at the what can we do about it step. But where we find them challenged is in the what can go wrong step, because this requires one to come up with novel problems to solve instead of just solving the problems. And this is where we'll be focusing our talk today. When you go through what can go wrong, this is all about contextual brainstorming and reuse. There isn't a magical list of all the possible threats out there that you can just draw down on. You need to think about it contextually around the system that you are building. Now, to aid that brainstorming, you could use something like Stride, which suggests 6 different threat categories for you to think about in the context of your system. So this could be spoofing, tampering, information disclosure, or others. You may also look at existing lists out there to help aid your brainstorming, like the OWASP Top 10, which is a broad consensus of the top 10 most critical security issues facing web applications. And the goal is to come up with threat statements, things that can go wrong. But we hear challenges from our builder personas, such as software developers, that they feel like they're starting from a blank page. They're not even sure what a good threat statement looks like. And we often observe the anti-pattern of coming up with threats by reverse engineering from mitigations people have already thought about, which effectively means we're not solving any additional threats. We're just providing justification for the mitigations we've thought about. Next, we have our application security SME. These are generally the people that are reviewing threat models. And the feedback we hear from them is there's a lack of consistency in the threat models that they're getting across the organization, which really hinders the comprehension from that team. Secondly, they find that these mitigations that are provided, the information that's provided doesn't provide enough information to help devise a solid mitigation. And then finally, we have our business persona. This is the person that owns the backlog of that team. They're not sure how to prioritize one threat and associated mitigations over another. So to start to address some of these challenges, let's ask ourselves, what is a useful threat statement? The attributes of a useful threat statement is, first and foremost, it needs to be contextually relevant. it's very seldom that a generic threat statement that someone's pulled off the internet is going to be useful. This requires you to think about things in the context of the system that you're building. Next, it should contain information within the threat statement that helps you actually devise a risk response strategy and mitigation. This is often about including information about the attacker, about the actions that they're taking, and any prerequisites that would need to be true in order for that attack to be successful. Next, it should contain information that helps you prioritize one threat and series of mitigations over another. This is all about the impact. What is the thing of value that's being impacted and how? Because that helps you derive a prioritization. And finally, it should be consistent. This helps reduce the cognitive load for comprehension and allows for reuse across your organization. So let's look at an example of what we consider to be a useful threat statement. And I'm going to read through this. An internal threat actor with administrative access can tamper with data stored in the database, which leads to modifying the username of the all-time high score, negatively impacting the integrity of our video game high score list. Now, there's quite a lot to unpack there, so let's step through it. Let's start with our threat source. This is our internal threat actor. And the action that they're taking, the threat action, is tampering with data stored in the database. Over here, we have a prerequisite. The prerequisites are the states that need to be true in order for the threat action from the threat actor to be viable. The combination of what we've read so far allows us to devise a mitigation. There's sufficient information in there for us to reasonably come up with a mitigation for this threat. Let's keep going. Modifying the username of the all-time high score. This is the threat impact. This is the direct result of a successful threat action from our threat actor. The thing that they're impacting, our asset, our thing of value, in this case, is the video game high score list. Now, when it's additive, you may want to be specific about the business or security objective that's being negatively impacted by this threat. Now, in this case, we've selected integrity. Because it's a video game high score list, we don't care about its confidentiality. That's public information, but we do care about its integrity, which helps us prioritize this threat over others. So that portion at the end gives us the information we need to help prioritize the mitigation and the associated threats. So how can you come up with useful threat statements for your workloads and features whilst taking into account those challenges that we heard from the builder, the business, and the AppSec persona? And this is where we want to introduce a little tool that we created called Threat Composer, which is focused on this what can go wrong threat modeling step, which aims to make it faster and easier for you to focus your brainstorming on coming up with contextual and useful threats, and iteratively compose the useful threats with the time that you have available. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Jesse to take us through a demo.
Thanks, Darren. Demo time. So let's assume that you are tasked to perform threat modeling for typical three-tier web app. You know that a typical three-tier app, including a front-end UI, an API, and a database. The UI calls the API to retrieve data from database. So assume that we are using SQL database here. And you have prepared all the information like application detail, solution design, data flow diagram, etc. for what we are working on part of threat modeling. Now you are ready to draft your threat statements. Where should you get started? Where should you get started? So now today I'm going to show you how to come up with useful threat statement using our open source tool, Threat Composer. So this is the Threat Composer editor page. So let's just see whether the demo plays. Okay, sorry. Thank you, Darren. So as we know, a useful threat statement considers 6 elements: threat source, prerequisites, threat action, threat impact, impact goal, and impact assets. Here you can click any elements to start with, and few elements in any order. And most importantly, all fields are optional. So for this demo, we start with impact assets. So in the impact asset editor, you will see a list of examples showing what impact asset looks like. So it can be a feature, a component, a data set, or combination of them. So when shopping in an e-commerce website, I interest most in the product pricing. I think most people do that. So we're using it as an example for the demo today. So next we can look at Impetigo. So here you can click other elements to work with as well. Remember, the order does not matter. So I just using example to choose Impetigo. So for Impetigo, the most common one are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Product pricing as a public available data, I don't think confidentiality is our concern. So we're using integrity example here. So once you have at least 2 elements field, you will see we generate a full sentence statement for you on the top of the UI. So you also give you a list of suggestions on how you can improve your threat statements. So now we can focus on brainstorming a threats relates to integrity of product pricing. So let's continue on our brainstorming. In what scenario, the integrity of product pricing can be negatively impacted? One scenario I can think of, a threat source can access the database to modify product pricing data, right? So we can continue on the threat action. So we can search example by using keyword. For example, database here. We find a match for our case, brute force the database credential, but for most of the time, you might need to create examples or using the free text input to populate your content. So like you might change the wording, etc. for your use case. So for threat impact, in this case, we can tie a free text input, the ability to modify data to finish the sentence, because the impact leads to the ability to modify data. As you can see, the generic statement has been updated, and on the right, the app shows some metrics. So as we can see, we can improve our threat statements by providing more inputs for mitigation, right? So we can try prerequisites. We know that one prerequisite for someone to access SQL database is there existing a network path to database. So we can search example to find whether we have some match there. Yes, we have a few match, so one is fits our case, so we can select that. So threat source, there are a few pre-populated content. We can directly choose external threat actor for our case. So we have all the elements field, and we have a general statement. So now you can copy the general statements or click the Add to Workspace button to save the threats. So here you go. This is our threat statements list page. So as you can see, it has all the list statement. So on Threat Composer, the data is organized under a container called workspace. So if you are working on different workload or features, you can create a workspace for each of them. For this demo, I have created a workspace called 3-tier web app, and also pre-populate some threat statements. As you can see, our new threats has been added to the list. So one thing to highlight here is Threat Composer data is persist only client-side within your web browser. So Threat Composer is a pure front-end web application, so you won't see their login there. So we didn't set, it's a pure front-end, okay, we didn't send any data to any backend. So on Threat Composer, you can label threats using tags. So the way in how a threat tag is purely depends on your individual preference or the demand of your organization. For example, we can tag database to represent database-related threat. So for each threat statements, you can assign priorities or strike categories or add free text comment in Markdown formats. So for example, we can assign high priority to our new threats. And what is its strike category? I think it's temporary, might more. So just select that here. So threat statements list support filtering by priority and strike, impact assets. All the value list here is all from your input in the impact asset editor. So it will be list here. So for the most common use case is like I will filter the list to find high priority items to work on. So let's just click the filter for now. So as I mentioned, on Thread Composer, data is kept in your web browser. What happens if you want to share the data with your teammates, other team members? So you can export that into a JSON file. So, and then you can share with colleagues, and you can commit this file into your code repository. So just like effectively having your threat modeling as code that alongside with your application code. So now you are ready to draft your next threat statements. When you need some ideas, I found that the give me a random example feature is very useful. So you can click the add new statements button, and you bring you back to the thread editor page. So click the give me a random example button. The app will give you a random example from our random example data set. So this is for your brainstorming, so you can edit the components or the elements of that and compose your own. Alternatively, you can search from our full example list. For example, using free text or stripe value. So for example, you want to see all the example threads relates to information disclosure. You can search that, and you can read through the thread list, and then find your ideas, and then the same, like click and edit and compose on your own. So how simple is that? So okay, I'm confident that you should be able to continue our task on threat modeling for our e-commerce website. So we'll share the URL later in the presentation. You can continue offline. So thank you. So now I'm going to hand the mic back to Darren to wrap up the presentation.
All right, thank you, Jesse. Okay, just to recap the features that you saw. First of all, it renders structured threat statements based off your user input. It provides an ever-progressive adaptive threat statement structure to give you value even if you provide minimal input. Along the way, it's providing you dynamic suggestions based on both the input you do provide and the input you do not provide to try and drive you towards a more complete threat statement. It also includes full threat statement examples mapped through to Stride that you can use to help inspire your own brainstorming. Also, what Jesse highlighted is this is 100% browser storage. If you open up DevTools, you're not going to see any API calls anywhere. We did this very deliberately because we consider your threat statements to be 100% your data, and you want to keep that within your control. To be able to support sharing and persisting outside of the browser, it supports exportation to JSON that you can then persist elsewhere, for example, in your version control, or share with other colleagues to continue work on the threat model. It also supports workspace separation, so you can work on multiple threat models at a given point in time. Now, what you saw today is hosted on GitHub.io pages, so you can go there directly today. Consider that to be the demo website. It's fully functional, but we also have a version of it that is fully deployable into your AWS account. We provide a CDK project that includes all the infrastructure you need, inclusive of an optional CI/CD pipeline where you can do customization. Now, one thing I wanted to bring up, because we're pretty excited about it, is the roadmap and the preview of where we're going with this tool. We've already laid the foundations of this tool to cover the end-to-end threat modeling workflow, because what you've seen today is really much focused on the what can go wrong step. We've included functionality on the what are we building step, allowing you to bring in application information, architecture diagrams, and data flow diagrams. And in the what are we going to do about it step, we allow you to capture mitigations and assumptions and link them through to threats, and actually produce a threat model document for you that you can export and share amongst your organization. And this functionality is available today in preview at the GitHub link that I'll provide you shortly. So what we envisage is that you would be threat modeling with your application as it's being developed and keeping the threat model as structured data within version control, effectively having your threat model as code. So the calls to action. What you saw today, the scoped down version of Threat Composer is listed at the first link. That's the github.io link. This is good for demo usage. If you want to use it in your own organization, you want to have a look at the number 2 link there. That takes you to our GitHub page that has the fully deployable self-hosted solution and also allows you to use the preview of the fully capable solution that we're building out. 3, here at Reinforce, we're running 2 sessions on how to perform threat modeling. These are 2-hour workshops today and tomorrow. We encourage you to register. I'm one of the speakers there, and we will be using this tool as part of that workshop. Optionally, if you're too busy, this link will take you to our e-learning version of that you can do outside of Reinforce and take to your colleagues. That's free of charge. And then finally, of course, we ask for your feedback. So please open up the mobile app, give us your feedback on this talk. We really appreciate it. So thanks from Jesse and I, and enjoy the rest of Reinforce. Oh, and we'll hang back if there's any questions. Thank you.